Hello. Today we're going to talk about something that sounds a little bit funky. And what that is we are going to be talking about getting X or the variable, whatever the variable is, alone. And it's kind of funky because it sounds weird. It's kind of like we're being a little bit creepy and we're getting X alone. But we kind of are. We're going to get rid of everything and try to just have the variable. So this is called isolating the variable. The variable does not have to be X. It could be A or B or N or Y. But I'm just calling this lesson Get X Alone so that we can know that what we are doing is getting the variable alone. Okay. And X is a variable we use a lot, but we are going to use other ones today as well. So again, the math way to say that is isolate the variable. Isolate means to get something alone by itself, completely independent or on its own from everything else. That's what we want. Our goal today is to get the variables with nothing else. So get rid of everything else. And I'm going to show you how to do that. The first thing we have to do, though, is we have to make sure that we can remember our lesson about inverse operations. Okay, so our lesson about inverse operations, we learned that inverse operations are opposite operations and those opposite operations undo each other. So opposite operations, inverse operations are operations that undo each other. The examples of those, remember, they kind of come in pairs. We did this lesson earlier in the week, probably yesterday. Those operations come in pairs. So the first pair of inverse operations are adding, addition, and subtraction are inverse operations. That means that addition undoes subtraction and subtraction undoes addition. The other pair of inverse operations are multiplication and division. Those operations undo each other. If you want to undo something that's added, you got to subtract it. If you want to undo something that's divided, you've got to multiply it. Okay, super important for what we're doing today. Okay, so let's just warm up a little bit. Let's just write the inverse of each thing. So how can I get rid of, or what's the inverse? What's the opposite of adding 7? Think about what the opposite of adding is. What is the opposite of adding? Well, the opposite of adding is subtracting. So to get rid or to do the inverse of plus 7, I would do minus 7. All right. And then the next one, minus 13. I want the inverse of that. So what is the inverse or the opposite of minus 13? What's the opposite of subtract? The opposite of subtract is add. So the inverse of minus 13 must be plus 13. All right, the next one, times 9. And sometimes, you guys, you're going to see multiplication written like this. You're going to see it. You might see multiplication written like this, times 9. Remember, that's still multiplication. So if you see it like that, don't get confused. So the inverse of times or of multiplication, the opposite of multiply is divide. So the opposite of multiply by 9 is to divide by 9. And remember, in algebra, sometimes we don't use that division symbol. How we see division more often is with a slash. So you might actually see it as divide by 9 like that. Okay, that also says divide by 9. Speaking of divide, so the next one says divide by 3. I want the opposite of divide by 3. Think to yourself, what is the opposite of divide by 3? What's the opposite of dividing by 3? So the opposite of divide is multiply. The The opposite of divide is multiply. And the opposite of divide by 3 is to multiply by 3. And remember, you could also show that with the multiplication dot as well. Okay, or parentheses. There's a lot of different ways to show multiply and divide. Okay, now that we know these inverse operations, that's going to help us because now we're going to get to the part where we actually get to get the variable by itself, the x alone, the isolate the variable. We get to actually do that now. But we have to remember these opposite operations in order to be able to do that. Okay, so this is an example of an expression where I might want to get the x alone. So I've got to think to myself, I want to get x alone. I know that the variable is x, and I don't want anything else near it. I want to get rid of everything else. How could I get rid of plus 3? Think to yourself, what is the opposite? I can get rid of it by using the inverse. So what is the opposite of plus 3? If I give you 3 of something, I would need to take it away to get rid of it. So the opposite, the inverse of plus 3 is minus 3. So to get x alone here, you would have to subtract 3. And let's see what that leaves us with. Well, okay, so we have x. X is still there. Plus 3 minus 3. Well, look at that. Plus 3 minus 3. That goes away. And look at us. We did such a good job. We got x totally by itself. We got x totally by itself. X is alone. It had plus 3, but we subtracted 3, so we win. We got x by itself. We just isolated the variable. Right, let's look at a couple more. What if it starts with subtraction? So we still want to get the variable by itself, but this one looks like it has subtraction. So first I've got to think, what is the variable here? What is the variable? Well, the variable here is p. I want p by itself. I don't want anything else with p. I want p totally by itself. So I'm going to look and I'm going to go, okay, well, what's with p? I see that it says p minus 1. So I want to get rid of the minus 1. I want to get rid of whatever's being subtracted or added or multiplied or divided. In this case, it is minus 1. I want to get rid of that minus 1. Think, what's the opposite of subtracting? What is the opposite of subtracting 1? What is the opposite or the inverse of subtracting 1? The inverse of subtracting 1 is adding 1. So it was subtracted. Now we're going to add it, and we want to get p by itself. So let's see. We still have p. We didn't do anything to the p, but we did minus 1 plus 1. Those go away, and we have our answer of just p by itself. Notice how I'm looking at the variable. I'm seeing what's next to the variable. I'm doing the opposite to get rid of it, and then I have the variable all by itself. Okay, this is going to be really important as we work on solving equations. So please be focusing on this because I promise you this will be a very helpful skill. We've got 2 more examples to do. Ooh, I wonder if we remember how to handle this. Do we remember how to handle this? Remember when 2 things are smushed really tight together? It's not add, it's not subtract, it's not divide. When 2 things are smushed really close together, it is multiplication. It is actually 2 times h. And remember, we can write it as 2 times h, or we can write it as 2 times h. There's lots of different ways. But the easiest way to show multiplication is just to smush those 2 things right together and use parentheses if we need to. So we know that this is being multiplied. This is 2 times h. Think to yourself, how do I get rid of times 2? What is the opposite? I want to get rid of. What is the opposite of times 2? What is the opposite of that? What is the inverse of times 2? Well, the inverse of multiply is divide. So I need to divide by 2. Remember that how we show dividing by 2, we have to be careful. We show division in algebra with a fraction bar. So I'm going to divide by 2. And let's see what this leaves us with. So the 2 times 2 divided by 2, those undo each other. Times 2 divided by 2, those undo each other. And all we are left with, yay, is the h. So we isolated the variable. We are left with just the h by itself. Okay, next one. This one looks a little funky too. Maybe we remember what this means when we see a slash. When we see a slash, remember, this is actually, there's a couple different ways we could have written this. We could have written it as y divided by 12, or we could have written it as y divided by 12. Remember that a slash like this right here, that means to divide, okay? So that is y divided by 12. Now, I want to know, what is the opposite? What is the inverse of divide by 12? What is the inverse of divide by 12? What is the opposite of divide? What is the inverse of divide? The opposite of divide is multiply. So we are going to multiply by 12. There's lots of different ways you can show this. You can show it with the little multiply dot. You can show it by using parentheses and putting times 12 and smushing it right up there. That says y divided by 12 times 12. If you use the x to show multiplication like this, times 12, be very careful that that does not get confused for the letter x. Okay, so I really prefer to use the dot times 12. All right, so let's see here. Y divided by 12 times 12. Well, divided by 12 times 12, those undo each other. Awesome, those go away. And all we are left with is y. So we got the variable by itself. Okay. Getting the variable by itself is a really important piece of algebra. You need to be able to look at the variable and see what's next to it. Okay, you need to be able to be like, okay, what's that variable? Oh, I see there's a y. The y has a divided by 12 right next to it. That is a really important skill. You need to be able to notice what operation it is, what the variable is, and those things, because we're going to go into solving equations next, and those skills will really help you. Noticing what operation is being used will really help you. Knowing how to undo that operation will really help you. Okay, so your job today is to go in and do the assignment. There's some more examples. Your job today is to decide on each of the problems how to undo or how to get rid of whatever is with the variable. Okay, remember, as always, email me if you have any questions, and I look forward to seeing your guys' work. Bye.